Melly. He joins us from London. He is a consulting fellow in Africa program at Chatham House. So what should we read then into the timing of this attempt at a coup coming exactly after the announcement of Ali Bongo as the winner of the election?
Well, I think that in itself tells us quite a lot, because the fact that the government announced the election results without any notice, essentially in the very early hours of the morning, when most people in Gabon were asleep, um, that already tells you that the government was concerned that there would be quite a lot of protest, a lot of questioning about the credibility of the election result. And clearly, the soldiers who have staged this coup um, wanted to forestall, if you like, the chance for the government to make that result an enduring reality. And as you mentioned, Ali Bongo first came to power in 2009 on the death of his father. The election that brought him to power after his father's death was itself very contentious. Um, he he finally emerged as the winner, but there was the situation, the results were very sort of cloudy, if you like, very opaque. Um, the main rival candidate disputed that result. Then in 2016, when Ali Bongo ran for re-election, again, the election was very close, and it was decided with results from the Bongo family's home area at the very last minute, and then the records for those local polling station data, as it were, the polling station records confirming those results were destroyed before they could be independently audited by the international Francophone community. So there's this history of, shall we say, Bongo being elected and then re-elected in a rather cloudy, opaque conditions, which has not fostered strong public faith in the credibility of the election process. So although this last election result, the official result, was declared with a bigger margin, there are going to be a lot of people in Gabon who will have doubted whether it was credible. That really explains, I think, the timing of the soldiers' intervention.
And we mentioned that if this attempt to seize power in Gabon succeeds, it will be the eighth coup in Africa in recent times, and all of these have been from former French colonies. How much is this down to the legacy of French colonialism and the perception of France being seen to continue to meddle in the domestic affairs of these countries long after independence?
Well, although that perception is something that's, if you like, helped create easier conditions for soldiers to seize power, in fact, the actual motivations for the coup, the driving factors for the coup, weren't really anything to do with French interference in these different situations, with the possible exception of Chad. But in Burkina Faso and in Mali, which both have had two coups, what really pushed the soldiers was resentment in the army at what they perceived was weak government leadership in the fight against jihadist groups in the Sahel. In Guinea, the soldiers seized power because the president in office had rigged a constitutional referendum so that he could stand for a third term. And he'd actually done that against the advice of the French. The French had privately advised him not to do that, as had other countries in the region, but he ignored all that outside advice. And then the army later stepped in a year or two later. And then in Niger, although resentment of the French has helped the soldiers who've taken power to mobilize crowds in their support, actually, the motivation for the coup seems to have really come from internal factors in the army. One of the coup leaders had been sacked as army chief of staff in April. There was speculation that the man who's ended up as the leader of the junta in Niger, head of the presidential guard, was about to be sacked. So it seems to be internal factors. Chad is a bit different because there President Deby had been killed in fighting, actually in battle fighting rebels in April 2021. And what happened was that the military who were the basis of President Deby's power, they facilitated the arrival of his son to come into office immediately afterwards and step into those shoes. And then protest has been suppressed quite brutally in Chad in October of last year. Now, France was accused, if you like, of propping up this transition, this military transition. The French government tried to navigate a rather difficult line where it said it would support Chad's stability, but the French were also trying to support West African efforts to encourage Chad to adopt a more reformist path. But so Chad's a bit of a special case, but in the other cases, you can't say that the French had internally meddled. And in the case of Gabon, when President Macron visited Gabon, he made a very specific point of saying it was just for an environment conference. He wasn't going to get involved in politics. The elections were nothing to do with France. So although that history of French influence creates a sort of climate in which the soldiers have found it easier to stage coups, that hasn't really been the principal motivation, if you like.
Good to talk to you. Paul Melly joining us there from London. Thanks very much for your perspective.